When you're first starting your business, the entrepreneurial focus, you should be doing everything for everyone at all times to find what the opportunities are. But at
Hmm.
some point, your business gets mature enough where you can say, look, this is what we do best. This is what we don't do best, or this is what I want to do more of. And this is what I want to stop doing for my clients or customers. So it's really taking a look at all the things you're doing for some of your top customers and
Hmm.
maybe looking at it and having a conversation to say, look, we don't make a lot of money on these 20% of things that we're doing for you. We're happy to do these other things. What is your reason for buying from us for those things?
You are listening to the 5 a.m. podcast, and today is your day.
I'm your host, Michael Clausen, and today we're diving into the world of business finance, but not that dry spreadsheet heavy version you might be expecting. Today, our guest has been called the financial blind spot detective by his clients, and who doesn't need one of those? Ken LaCroix is a visionary to transform how business owners interact with their numbers, turning financial confusion into strategic clarity. With over 2 decades in corporate finance, Ken now serves as a fractional CFO, helping CEOs uncover hidden profits and make data-driven decisions that actually move the needle. He's seen firsthand how the right metrics can transform that struggling business into a scalable success story. Ken, welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast.
Thank you, Michael. Super happy to be here.
I'm happy to talk some numbers and find some hidden money maybe and some blind spots. I'm sure that you are well received. Can you talk a little bit about that reception when you first come to a business and somebody might be saying, "What's this guy here for?" Which I have gotten. Let me tell you, when I've walked through the door, but somebody else is saying, "Hold on, this guy's got he's got the goods."
When we first get there, we're sort of the anti-accountants. So we're rarely hired by the accounting department. We're hired by the executive team, the ones that
Okay.
are looking for a little more insight into their numbers than traditional accounting reports and traditional accounting might give them. And
Yes.
we're usually called in when their CPA sort of says, "Look, we tell you what happened in the past. We do tax returns. We'll publish your financials, but we're not all that comfortable telling what's going to happen, discussing what might happen, discussing all the different scenarios." So we sort of walk in. We have to be a little careful with the accounting department because they think we're here to rock their world or uncover some things and do stuff, and that's hardly the reality. We're here to support them and make their lives a lot easier as well by trying to find some answers to questions that, frankly, standard accounting reports don't always give the answers to.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it of they're looking back and saying, "Here's my report, sir." Whereas as you're looking for some different metrics, I know many years ago I had a great accountant, very thorough fellow, and he loved the forecasting part that is not traditional for
Sure.
other people that I've worked with. But he said he had this 80-year-old client, uh, widow, and she would always say, "If I take care of my nickels and dimes, the dollars will look after themselves." So, can you talk maybe a little bit about those, maybe some nickel and dime scenarios that you've discovered for clients and how it's paid off for them?
Well, we have a slightly different approach than most. I
Okay.
think when when new finance or new coaches or new people get engaged, they kind of look at the general and administrative expenses. They look at rent, office supplies, how much you're paying your suppliers, because those are contractual. They make a lot of sense. You don't always know if you're paying the right amount based on your activity. Maybe you've doubled your shipping. There's an opportunity to look at that. But we figure that, for the size of businesses that we're dealing with, call them 5 million to 50 million, that
Okay.
stuff's managed pretty well. There's really not layers and layers of management layers sort of getting in the way of those decisions. The owner's cutting the check, or the owner is negotiating it, or they've got a very good purchasing department that's taking care of it. What we focus on is where the law of averages really does a disservice to the businesses and the business owners and the management team, and that is the cost of sales, your gross profit, your gross margin, sales by customer, sales by item, sales by customer and item, sales by item and supplier, sales by item, supplier, and customer. Historically, those are all very difficult numbers to pull together. And by the time you did, the opportunity to make a decision was lost. So there wasn't much value in it. But accounting has become all digital. As if it's not, that's what we help with. We make it all digital. And because it's all digital, it doesn't matter if we're evaluating one product or 15,000 products, two customers or 20,000 customers, one transaction or 4 million transactions. It's all about the same. So we sort of roll in and start to try and find the trends. We try and find that 80-20 rule. We find to try and find what's happening where, and then start having discussions around it. So that's how we're a little bit different when we approach things.
And so you've mentioned that maybe it's most, maybe it's many, a handful anyway, of business owners are leaving money on the table without even realizing it. And that would certainly suck some air out of the room, talking to some business leaders saying, listen, you're leaving money on the table, friend. Are there like a top three financial blind spots that you consistently uncover when working with new clients?
They evolve around customers, items, and suppliers. Let's talk customers first.
Sure.
Sometimes you're doing too many things for your customers, especially your larger customers. So when you're first starting your business, the entrepreneurial focus, you should be doing everything for everyone at all times to find what the opportunities are. But at some point, your business gets mature enough where you can say, look, this is what we do best. This is what we don't do best, or this is what I want to do more of. And this is what I want to stop doing for my clients or customers. So it's really taking a look at all the things you're doing for some of your top customers and maybe looking at it and having a conversation to say, look, we don't make a lot of money on these 20% of things that we're doing for you. We're happy to do these other things. What is your reason for buying from us for those things? And they might say, look, we really enjoy the fact that we can create one PO. Our purchasing department can buy everything from you. If you need to raise your price on those things, we understand. That's worth it. Or they might say, we've been we're very loyal. We've been buying from you. We would rather buy those things from someone else, but we're just loyal and we wanted to give you the business. So those are two very good conversations to have. If they move some of their purchasing, now you're only selling the products that are higher in value. You're only selling products that make sense for you. And that frees up some resources to, again, double down on what you're profitable at, what you're good at, or what your next product might be. The second one is items. All items are not the same. The rule of thumb, the law of averages, that really works against you. Your business is profit and loss by 1,000 cuts, 1,000 drips, 1,000 victories. And so understanding which items, when, and how. And normally when it comes to items, I talk about velocity. I talk about how many times does that item churn, roll over, create money, bring money in a given month, quarter, or year. Because we often think about, well, I paid $1 for that, so I can't sell it for less than $1. I have to have a 50% margin. I need to sell it for $1.50. When the reality is, if you bought it for $1 and it doesn't sell for a year, yeah, you have another item that you're buying for $1 and it can sell once a month. That's 12 times on the $1 that you get to create your margin, and that's 0 times on the other dollar that you need to not create your margin. So it's really letting go of sunk costs around items and letting go of sunk costs around what you already paid and just finding what really works, putting more effort, money, time into those, and then forgetting about the mistakes. Just get rid of them, move them out, make it clear. Doesn't matter what you paid for them. It matters what you can do with the money that you freed up. And then
Yeah.
finally, around suppliers, there's always opportunities to maybe dive into what they're doing, ask about what their R&D is, ask about what their next products are, understand what their roadmap looks like, understand what their financial capabilities are, make sure that you don't have a lot of risk around it, make sure there's not going to be a surprise. Maybe talk with them about the ways you can partner to potentially lower cost. For instance, your supplier might say, well, if I knew that you were going to order 10,000 of those a year, I would be happy to lower your price. Does it have to be exactly 10,000? No. Do you have to buy it all up front? No. Let's work on a plan where we'll estimate around 800 items per month and we'll just check in every quarter and see how we're doing. And if you don't end up doing that, we'll have a bit of a true up. But if you end up doing more, we can give you a better discount. Those are just dialogues. Those are things to happen. Everything doesn't have to be that single transaction.
Right. Yeah. Well, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about a manufacturing plant, a food manufacturing plant, and just to drill down a little bit more on the specifics. And they were giving us a tour of one of their warehouses. And the fellow that was walking with us, we had met through a Chamber of Commerce event. And you know how those relationships go. But he was, as we were going through, he was pointing out a couple of bins in their racking. And he was saying, yeah, this stuff just doesn't really move. So we're considering cutting this out just because it's taking up not only the floor space, but brochure space and talking with, the vendors. It was a food manufacturing facility. And one of the things that they started bringing in was coffee pods or coffee pouches also for some of their clients that were ordering these baking related things. And I looked at that and I thought, boy, that just does not seem to fit with your business model, friend. I was kind of like, yeah, we know. We found that out. And so it's good. I'm sure that you have discovered that tension between those gut instinct and those data driven decisions. So as someone like yourself who's navigated those corporate finance and entrepreneurship, how do you recommend maybe business owners strike that right balance between is this thing going to fly versus the data driven decisions?
So we feel that gut decisions are very important. It's just that they're not the entire decision making process. So trust but verify, gut but confirm. Just
Yeah,
make sure that that everything's going in the right direction. Data doesn't always hold the answer. Part of the issue with data is, how are you framing the problem? How are you framing the equation? How are you framing the result? You need to be very careful in relying only upon data. There's really a good balance between the two. But if you're only making decisions on gut because you're not getting the right numbers out of your accounting department or your finance department or your purchasing department or whatever department that is, really try and understand why those numbers are not coming forward. Because in today's day and age, almost everything is digital. And if everything comes into your business digitally, then there's really no reason you shouldn't have access to that data. Sometimes it's taking a look at even processes that are only 3, 4, 5 years old, but certainly some that are 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years
right.
old.
Yeah.
It's good enough. We've always done it this way. The status quo, it seems to work. I'm not sure. I don't know. Those, when we get answers to the questions we ask around that, that's when we know there's probably some opportunities for improvement.
Can you talk a little bit about how entrepreneurs might maybe they feel overwhelmed by the choices that they have and maybe they need to kind of scale back, but there's a lot of emotions in that kind of
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that entrepreneurs don't have to be right. They don't have to be spot on. They don't, the job of an entrepreneur is to try things and test things and find opportunities, really take risks that no one else is willing to take, be nimble in ways that other organizations cannot be nimble, and learn from mistakes faster in ways that other organizations cannot. So get rid of the shame, guilt, and any of those feelings around anything and move to, hey, we tried it. Here's what we found out. Try and get as much information from your failures as you can from your successes. I might argue that you'll learn more about your failures than your successes, and understanding why you failed is a lot more comforting than not understanding why you succeeded. And those can really build confidence in a leader and a leadership team. So celebrate the failures, celebrate the, hey, that didn't work out. Now, don't put your company at risk by doing that. Make sure that's well defined. Here's where we'll stop. Here's where we will discontinue funding. Here's the milestones in advance that says, look, we're going to try this, but we'll, in other words, have your stop defined early on so that you don't get stuck with, well, we put $100,000 in it already. I guess I'll put another 20,000
yeah,
in
right.
because I don't want to lose the 100. But the 100 is a sunk cost. The
Yeah,
20,000 that could be available for something else. So just try and be as dispassionate as you can about the results, knowing that a failure many times can be just as valuable as a success.
that's right. It's kind of that idea of the experience is better and more valuable than the outcome. Have you seen some things like that where maybe somebody has stepped out, but they were looking maybe in the wrong direction and you were able to counsel them on something that was more appropriate to their skill set and experience?
I think it's really important for entrepreneurs, business owners, leadership teams to understand the ecosystem that they play in and where they fall in that ecosystem. So if we want to just talk margins, let's say I'm a manufacturer and I'm selling into distribution. I'm now sharing that margin that the eventual customer will be paying. I'm sharing it with the distributor as well as myself, who's the manufacturer. So we often find companies want to say, look, we can sell directly to the consumer. we could have those additional margins. Think how much extra money we could have, not recognizing how much effort and time it takes to sell to the direct consumer. So if you have manufacturer distributors. If you're a manufacturer and you have distributors that are not performing and there's really nothing else you can do, then sure, bite the bullet and start to sell directly to the consumer. But recognize that instead of selling to four, six, or eight distributors, you might be selling to 10,000 customers now. Instead of selling based upon credit that you know is a very good credit risk, you might be selling to consumers that don't pay. You might not want to pay credit card processing fees. You might not have the systems in place to manage those orders, to manage all those customers. Going from four or eight customers to 8,000, 10,000, 20,000 customers, that's a sea of change on your information systems, on your people, the number of phone calls you're going to get. So recognize what those distributors are doing for you for their margin. You should do it anyway. You should know exactly what you're paying for what you're getting. Why do we give 10 points of margin, 20 points of margin to our distributor? Let me tell you, because they're doing this, they're doing this, they're doing this, they're doing this. We value all those things as this. When we add them up, they're doing it for 20 points of margin. We think it's worth 25 or 30. We're super happy. If you add them all up and they're doing it for 20 points of margin and you only value it at 10, by all means, have some discussions. By all means, look at it. But just understanding where you are in that ecosystem and why you have success, that's very, very important. We also see it conversely when someone finds a new idea. This is the most disheartening of all is when someone finds a new idea. Let's say they're traveling in Europe and they find this great little product and someone's been making it that way for generations. And they bring it to the United States and they take it to China or another offshore place to do manufacturing. And they create the tooling and they manufacture the product and it's a great success. Well, if they haven't really worked on their manufacturing contracts, if they haven't paid for their tooling, if they haven't secured their tooling, oftentimes they would not have paid for that because it's too risky. Well, if it's a success in the market, then you may find your manufacturer is knocking that product off, making the exact same product and offering it direct to the consumer. And now all of a sudden you have a real problem. So again, understand the value of your intellectual property, understand the value of your relationships. Maybe it's not the best thing to do to create the lowest cost product overseas as fast as possible, because you might find that when you make it a success, then others can just jump on the bandwagon and offer it for much, much less. So those are some of the areas that we've seen that caution really plays a role, and really understanding why you're paying for tooling, understanding why you're securing tooling, understanding why you're not sending drawings overseas, understanding why you're manufacturing it in the United States, understanding why.
Yes. And knowing who you're dealing with and who's on your team. That was a really good way to describe the distributors because they really are uh, taking on a certain amount of risk that the manufacturer doesn't have to deal with, and they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting to get that to product to market. So I wanted to ask you. Many entrepreneurs might feel maybe they're overwhelmed by their financials. There's a lot of things to look at, a lot of shiny objects coming their way. And so then they might relegate their financials as a necessary evil. But have you seen maybe a leader's relationship with their numbers transform once they gain some proper financial clarity?
We have. And so I don't blame the entrepreneur or the leader for that, because when you're first starting to run your business, you know more than the financials ever will. When you walk the shop floor, you know what's happening much better than any inventory or production report can tell you. When you're walking your manufacturing, when you're looking at the dust on the shelves on items, you can tell instantly what's moving, what's not moving. At some point, though, you run out of the ability to sort of confirm with these informal methods. You run out of the ability to go on half the sales calls, or you lose the ability to see every new customer, or you lose the ability to walk all the warehouses because now you have five, or you have 10, or now you've got a different model where those are sitting in third party logistics locations, or fill in the blank, something's changed. That's when you need to really understand the numbers, because the numbers themselves become a substitute for you being there, and then understanding how you want those numbers to look, what format you want them in, what cadence you want to look at them in. Those become sort of those key performance indicators. This is what I want to see. This is when I want to see it. This is how detailed I want to see it. And these are the ways I want to frame it. I want to know what we expected and what we did. I want to know what we did and what we did last period. I want to know what we did this period and a year ago. Once I have some of those numbers, I can get a much better idea for what's happening with that one number, that result, rather than just that lonely number of that one result.
Right.
Sales were up 10% is a lonely number.
Yes, that can put some things certainly in perspective of how we view things and quantify. And when we measure things, we know they can be controlled. And now you've mentioned, just mentioned KPIs, but you've also mentioned vanity metrics. And so is there kind of an equilibrium between the vanity metrics and the KPIs, or could you walk us through maybe an example where shifting a client's focus from those vanity numbers to true performance indicators really could create a breakthrough for them?
Well, I think it so, you know, the word vanity is interesting. It implies that they're there to either make us feel good or look good, and they don't have a purpose. So I prefer the term sort of lonely or an alone number, and
Okay.
sales up 10%, like I mentioned before,
Yes.
maybe that's a vanity number. If I plan for sales to be up by 20% and my sales are up 10%, then I've got a real problem. But if I plan for my sales to be up by 5% and my sales are up by 10%, I might want to crack the champagne. That might be something to celebrate.
Yeah.
If I thought my sales would be up by 10% and they're up by 10% and my competitor was up by 20%, then I'm not going to crack that champagne.
Yes, that's
I'm
for
going to
sure.
wonder, why didn't I forecast a greater number? But if I'm up 10%, I thought I'd be up 10% and my competitor's up 5%, that's gonna be something to celebrate. If we were up, if we were down 5% from last month, up 7% from a year ago, same period, I'm gonna recognize that I have some seasonality built in, and I'm gonna correct for that by understanding what did we do a year ago and what have we done now. We've made some progress over the last year. So it's really important to frame with as much other information around it. We personally think what you expected is the best measure. That's that forward looking piece. And if you miss it, if you overshoot it, if you hit it or you undershoot it, it doesn't matter. You want to know why you overshot it or why you hit it on the nail on the top of the head, or whether or why you were short. Understanding why makes your next forecast better, makes your next estimate better. And getting really, really good at estimating and forecasting is an extremely valuable tool for an organization.
Yes. Well, as you're talking about numbers and the lonely or the vanity ones and the KPIs, makes me think of the analytics that I constantly look at in my production work of other podcasts and 5 a.m. podcast, of course. But I felt like you really nailed it there, where you said what we want to know is not necessarily the month to month, although that's important, but the year over year or quarter over quarter. And then knowing why. Why are there less people on Substack for this last month? What was going on? Okay, so people were out at the lake. It was summertime. And then where are we going to go from here? So, one of the other things I was thinking of as you were talking is this information that you're describing would actually be really good for someone who's looking at purchasing an organization or a company. Can you talk about maybe some of that consulting you might do for someone who's looking at making a merger or an acquisition?
So what we want in any acquisition is arbitrage. We want to pay less for something
Yeah.
than really is there. So what we want to do is create that arbitrage, create that opportunity. So everything that I'm talking about, you can apply to your own business, but you can also apply to a business you want to purchase. These are all opportunities that you have to increase value, but not necessarily pay for. So from that perspective, I think it creates a great opportunity, a wonderful opportunity.
Right. And so then are there some other things maybe that you've come across when someone's looking, like we talked about the money that might be left on the table, but maybe there's some deep dark secrets that not everybody knows where to look for them in the event to make it actually look like some information you could use to benefit your arbitrage.
So I often say to business owners as sort of a challenge that an unsolicited offer for your business is the worst thing that can happen. Because we run into lots of business owners that say, if someone comes along and gives me my number, I'm good. And we feel that that's the wrong way to look at things. If someone comes along and offers you a number for your business, chances are they know more about your business than you do. And that's a very challenging statement. But the reality is, in the last 90 days, In the last 90 days, they will have talked to your large customers and asked what their experience was. And you may have touched a large customer a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, but you have not done that with your current large customers. They will look at all your items and how your competitors compare with those items and what your competitors are planning to do, what their R&D looks like. And they'll look at your vendors. They'll look at what your vendors have on the roadmap, what the financial strength of those are, whether that could be done differently. They will have done a lot of diligence that's very relevant in the last 90 days. And what they're looking for is the ability to put some of those things into play, but not pay you for that. So that's the best example I can give you of why you should always be thinking, what is my business worth? What could I sell it for today? How do I make it worth more tomorrow? What should I be doing to understand that? And some of those things I just described are things that perhaps you should be doing already.
It almost sounds like somebody might get an offer from one of your clients or suppliers, competitors that are looking to expand. And they're saying, oh, company XYZ orders from Joe, and we've always wanted Joe's business, but maybe we should just buy his client and absorb it into our monster.
Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com.
5am Podcast is brought to you in part by mkci.ca, a certified member of the Autodesk Developer Network. MKCI helps companies maximize their AutoCAD, Inventor, Navisworks, and other design software investments. Their innovative products like the CommandSys script editor and the Clash Management Suite will streamline your workflow and boost your productivity. Visit mkci.ca today to discover how they can enhance your competitive CAD advantage. That's mkci.ca. Thank you for your support of 5am Podcast. So then for our listeners, maybe they're early birds. The early bird gets the worm and they wake up early, 5 a.m. perhaps, to work on their business before all that day's chaos happens. Are there maybe some morning rituals, and it doesn't have to be morning, but some good business practice rituals that you would recommend people implement so that they can stay connected with their company's financial plans?
Most of the things that we've talked about are important and non-urgent. They will not move the needle day to day. They move the needle week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year. Once that business workday starts, the executive is overwhelmed by just the daily problems of business, the daily problems of people, culture, activity. And those by definition are important and urgent and non-important, or in some cases, non-important and non-urgent. So by waking up a little bit earlier and having some peace and quiet to focus on what is the one thing I need to get done today, or what is the one thing I need to get done this week even? Because sometimes these things can take multiple days to do. Sometimes they're stop and start. Sometimes they require effort from others. But if I'm on a Monday morning or a Tuesday morning, I might say by Friday, I really want to know what my top 10 items are for the last quarter in terms of profit margin percentage. And I'm going to go to the accounting department. I'm going to ask them to put it together, check in on Thursday. And if they don't have it by Thursday, I'll have a plan by Friday to figure out how I can do it myself. But what resources do I need? How would I figure it out? But the answer of we don't know is not going to fly on Friday afternoon. By Friday afternoon, I'll have a plan for the following week to figure out what that number is. Even if it's just an 80% estimate, I'll know what's going on and just focus on that one thing all week. So that's what those mornings can really be valuable for. Just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes of uninterrupted thought process. You can get an awful lot done.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how has the role of the CFO evolved, let's say, in the past 10 to 15 years, particularly maybe for a small or medium sized business that previously couldn't afford that level of financial guidance?
Well, we certainly have the fractional model. I've been doing it for
Hmm.
15 years.
Yeah.
It's really grown in that period of time. You can do fractional everything now, which is wonderful. So recognize that you can buy these things in the order and the cadence you need to consume them. A full-time CFO for a $5 million business, a $10 million business, that may not be required at all. There may be 5 hours a month, 10 hours a month, 2 hours a week, something on those lines where the CFO might really add value. The rest of the time, the business doesn't move fast enough. The decisions don't need to be made in that level of complexity or velocity. The other one is to recognize that sometimes your best CFO does not come from accounting. There's a tendency to think of accounting and then finance as sort of a linear piece. And what you really want out of your CFO is that strategic piece. You want them to be looking outside the organization as much as inside the organization. You want them to be pulling information from all over and applying it to what your numbers are, to what your strategy is, and then having conversations with lending sources, having conversations with other suppliers, really understanding what the risk is around the organization. I often think of a CFO as their job number one is understanding the risk, because where there's risk, there should be return. And I think a CFO's main job is to say, for the risks that we're taking, we feel comfortable for the returns we're getting.
Yeah. And so then another question I think that fits in with that is we often hear that cash flow is king or just cash is king, but cash has to flow. It is a currency. But are there some scenarios where prioritizing maybe some other financial metrics actually makes some more sense for long term growth?
So cash is definitely king. Cash flow either solves all or creates problems for all. We like to expand it a little bit into working capital. So working capital is the sort of your cash conversion cycle, your accounts receivable, your accounts payable, and your inventory, and look at all that working capital as that unit. And as we're creating sales plans, we usually are creating sales plans to increase sales. We don't really sit around and try and decrease sales, right? We sort of have one end of the tail. And so recognize that if we sell on credit, or if we're selling to customers that don't have as good of credit, or if we're selling to customers that require a little less margin, then recognize that those are all going to be things that put stress on the organization and put stress on working capital. So just frame those things in terms of, well, can I afford to do it? And what will happen if people don't pay me? And what will happen if I am out of stock of things? And what will happen if, and frame all the decisions there and make sure that there's coherence among that sales plan along with sort of the fulfillment.
Right. So many years ago, there was a lot of talk of the no left turns policy at UPS, which their engineers came up with. They studied that performance of their trucks. And I don't know if they're still doing it. I don't know if it's still a thing, but it certainly was something that some of my business friends had talked about. Are there innovations like that that maybe yourself or other people are still kind of coming up with?
Well, that requires really understanding the environment. So if you feel as though in your UPS delivery model that
Yes.
your business process ends when you load the truck, then you're going to be missing a lot of opportunities. But if you truly believe that that process begins when some customer's vendor orders and then decides to ship and then waits for fulfillment, if you expand sort of that ecosystem, then I think you will find some of those partnerships or ways of looking at things. I would imagine that whoever invented that particular rule started with the drivers. They didn't start in some conference room. They probably started with the drivers and observing the drivers and asking the drivers, the front lines. Many of your answers are sitting on the front lines, whether that's your own employees or your customers or your vendors.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really good way to look at it of being familiar with your organization and whether it's frontline or backline or somewhere in between. It sounds like getting to know your people and the processes are enormous impactors of the bottom line. And so you've worked with businesses across various industries, and there are probably universal principles that apply regardless of sector. Do you find that finance strategies are going to continue to be customized like this? There must be an appetite for finding that diamond in the rough?
I think the appetite has always been there. I think that the tools necessary to do it have been difficult. So we feel as though we're finally at the stage with some of the business intelligence tools that we can access, some of the database tools we can access, that you don't need a big IT plan. You don't need a big IT budget. You don't need a big anything to get started. There's opportunities to just start, just throw some data in and let it accumulate and then look at it later. The historically data has had to be very structured, and the ability to do unstructured data now is wonderful. So we're finding lots of opportunities just to collect the data from everywhere, not worrying about what's there and how it's there. And then once it gets collected, start understanding what that might mean. How accurate is it? How timely is it? How many errors might be there? And start to understand your data so that when you do reach the point where you found some magic bullet or you found something you really want to bite your teeth into in terms of analysis, the data is already there and you can just start understanding how can I use that.
Right. And so I still got a question or two for you there, Ken, but how can people get in touch with you?
We're at insightfulpartners.com. We're your data partners. We help you with understanding all these complex things. We help you see the light at the end of the tunnel. We help you figure out where that tunnel is. But everything we have are all of our sort of templates to download, all the blogs that we have, everything. You want to know more about me or our team, insightfulpartners.com.
It's great. And recently I did an interview, had a great conversation with Michael Haig, who's a well-known scriptwriter in Hollywood and gets into that whole storytelling for businesses. So I wanted to ask you then about financial storytelling and how businesses or business owners can better maybe communicate their financial situations with stakeholders, whether that's the investor or the employee, or maybe even a spouse. Are there some techniques of how to approach that financial storytelling for your business?
Remember to always meet your audience where they are. So we try really hard not to use jargon, accounting jargon. When we talk about things, we don't use accounts receivable. We use people that owe you money, or we just try as best we can to use the vocabulary that people understand rather than the jargon that's sort of held up in accounting or finance. Number one, I think number two, getting to the heart of the matter quickly. When we go to present financials, I like to think I have somewhere between 7 and 15 seconds to get my point across. So if I start with, and last month's sales were, I've used up all of my time right
Yeah,
there.
right.
So I got to talk about sales are up 10%. We thought they'd be up 12. Let's talk about why. Now I have their attention. So not really having a standard format to go through is really important to say, look, here's where we're going to start with. We try really hard not to publish our financials ahead of time. We try really hard to present them interactively as we go along. And that's different than the way most people approach it. But we feel the dialogue around the numbers is far more important than the numbers themselves. And then finally, we're visual people. We are not table or data oriented people. We evolved because we could look in the landscape and notice that there was a predator out there somewhere. It was visual. We didn't look out in the forest and say there's a 73% chance there's a cougar out there, 19% chance there's a jaguar, and a 9% chance there's an elephant. We look and see and look for patterns and look for when our patterns are different and decide where we're going to put our focus. Financials are no different. Use those visuals, understand what those trends are. Visuals are very, very critical in that financial storytelling.
Right. And so then for listeners with maybe seasonal businesses or irregular cash flow, what systems have you found maybe most effective for managing that fluctuation without compromising that important growth investment?
That's where your trailing periods are your friend. That's where trailing 12 months, trailing 3 months. If I have seasonality built into my numbers, then if I'm using trailing metrics, which is basically running averages, moving averages, if I know the direction of my moving average every day, every week, every month, every quarter, then I know immediately what impact I have on my business, whether I'm ahead of last year or not. Numbers can be down, but up from prior year. If I can see that instantly on a moving average, then I know whether I need to pay attention or not. Rather than saying numbers are down, let me go look at last year. Let me do the calculation. We're here. Well, I wonder what happened in between. Well, what happened last summer? What happened that last year? Oh, was that. That's very complicated to do. And again, uses up all the valuable time we have. If I've got these moving averages, these trailing 12 months or trailing periods, I'll just know from the direction of the curve whether I need to pay attention or not. And that is incredibly valuable, especially on a daily basis. If I'm looking at my numbers on a daily basis, that trend, that 90-day or that 180-day or 1 year trend is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Almost, I can picture like a flywheel on the engine, but like a financial growth flywheel where improvements maybe in one area can positively affect others. Do you kind of come across that in your dealings with clients?
I think people really underestimate the power of momentum, the power of the flywheel. But remember, the flywheel works both ways. It speeds things up and it slows things down. So I think when it comes to the flywheel effect, I'm looking for things that will improve the velocity. We talked earlier about velocity, things that will add to the direction I want to go. And I want to remove the things that are slowing the flywheel down. I want to remove the layers of decision making. I want to remove the negative returns. I want to remove the difficult stuff that no one wants to do, that frankly we may not be very good at and we shouldn't be doing at all. I want to have those frank discussions about what's slowing down my flywheel as much as I want to have those discussions around what is improving my flywheel, because it's easy to talk about where to improve. It's really tough to look internally and ask those hard questions and admit defeat or admit that we haven't done as well. And I think that humility is really important in business.
Right. So then looking ahead, how do you see the automated intelligence, artificial intelligence, and other types of automation changing or becoming involved in financial decision making? Do you see a shift, or is there a way to prepare your clients for that?
There's definitely a shift, and we've been using AI in finance for a long time. We've been scanning invoices. Once you've scanned 10 invoices from your vendor, you know how your vendor invoices. We've been scanning bank statements forever. Chase Bank has the same structure for a bank statement for all their clients across the United States or across the world for that matter. So the ability of saying, well, what is structured in my data where I can apply a rule to it, really, really important. And that lessens the keyboard the amount of work
Mhm.
done on a keyboard in the accounting department. You can also get bank feeds, of course, but that's more of a recent development, say the last 5 years, 10 years. So I think there's that. AI is really good at what happens frequently and repeatably, but I also think that AI is driving some of these tools that let you place a bunch of unstructured data in a place and start to try and see trends and let the AI determine what those trends are. Collecting your data and turning loose an LLM on your data and looking at it, even if it's completely off the first time around, those LLMs get better, your data gets better, and maybe it gets a little bit better a week later, a month later. So always have sort of this laboratory where we're looking and seeing what's happening in the artificial intelligence world. Trust but verify.
Yes.
Make your analysis, but double check the analysis. Make sure. But also, it's creating opportunities for data to be thrown into a model. And artificial intelligence does a pretty good job of recognizing data patterns. So when we're dealing with older systems that don't have a business intelligence package, maybe they can only output to a PDF or to some CSV, even if it's got a whole bunch of jumbled junk, we can usually turn AI loose and pull out the data from that pretty quickly and repeatably, which means I can run reports overnight for 900 jobs and I can get an update in the morning of what happened on those jobs. Whereas reviewing a 900-page report or an 1,800-page report or a 400-page report, trying to find the variances in there, never going to happen. So I think that's where AI is really helping. And we're also in the very early stages of it as it applies to smaller businesses.
That's true. That's true. I had never thought of those spreadsheet algorithms and equations actually as a part of LLM or AI, as other people would say. But fascinating conversation, Ken. Thank you so much for your time and this great conversation today.
Thank you, Michael. I enjoyed it extremely, extremely well.
Good. I loved it. It was a good conversation. It's nice to talk about those diamonds in the rough and finding things that maybe were meant to be kept hidden or were just begging to be found. So thanks again. And it was great having you on.
Thank you.
Good. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. As I mentioned already, my account used to tell me, take care of the nickels and dimes, and the dollars will take care of themselves. And please share this with three of your friends. I know many are going to appreciate and probably profit from this conversation. We do appreciate the likes and the shares and the comments. Please get a hold of Ken for all your financial questions regarding your business. I am sure that he's going to help steer you in the correct direction. Now, if you want to level up your support of the 5 a.m. podcast, of course, you can hit the store tab over at 5ampodcast.com for some great merchandise. We always like having those kinds of sales here. Also, of course, we do take donations over at buymeacoffee.com/5 a.m. podcast. Thank you for all levels of support. We do appreciate it. So until next time, please seize your day, enjoy those sunrises and sunsets, and a few episodes from our 5 a.m. back catalog. Thanks again. I'm Michael Clausen. We'll see you next time. 5 a.m. podcast is brought to you in part by mkci.ca. a certified member of the Autodesk Developer Network. MKCI helps companies maximize their AutoCAD, Inventor, Navisworks, and other design software investments. Their innovative products like the CommandSys script editor and the Clash Management Suite will streamline your workflow and boost your productivity. Visit mkci.ca today to discover how they can enhance your competitive CAD advantage. That's mkci.ca. Thank you for your support of 5am Podcast.
Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com.